Welcome back to Kings of the North, because the North owns college football. Doug Lesmeriss and Bill Landis. Landis, we got the bracket. We assume people watching this know the bracket, but we aren't going to assume that. We're going to run through it real quick and then talk about what just happened. 12-team college football playoff. But before we do that, Bill, let's rehash every argument we've had about this for 38 minutes, because apparently that's how you do television. Oregon 1, Georgia 2, Boise State 3, Arizona State 4. Those are the buys. Ohio State, Tennessee is an 8-9 game. The winner gets Oregon. Texas, Clemson, 5-12 game. The winner gets Arizona State. Notre Dame, Indiana, a 7-10 game. The winner gets Georgia. Penn State, SMU, a 6-11 game. The winner gets Boise State. Bama is out. Bill, your bracket from last night was pretty good. We did think Texas would be the 5 seed. That was right. We weren't sure what they do with Penn State and Ohio State, but overall, we avoided the Indiana-Ohio State first-round rematch, which is the thing I think we thought would be the least interesting.
Yes.
We are getting Tennessee coming north. We are getting SMU coming north. And then we're getting an in-state matchup between Notre Dame and Indiana, which is going to be pretty wild. What do you think of the fun meter of the bracket?
Yeah, I think it's pretty good. I love Indiana, Notre Dame. That's going to be great. I love Tennessee, Ohio State's going to be awesome. I think we maybe said last week those teams have only played once. I don't know how many times an SEC team has played in Ohio Stadium. I bet it's less than a handful. So that's really cool. I'm excited for that one. We said on Saturday night that we didn't particularly have a dog in the fight when it came to SMU or Alabama. I'd be lying a little bit if I didn't say I was kind of wishing to see Alabama come north to play in State College, if only for narrative purposes. But if they thought SMU was deserving, I'm okay with that. It was difficult, but even that in itself, I think is a pretty fun matchup, because SMU's got a pretty good, exciting offense. So I don't know, like scale of 1 to 10. I think maybe it could have been a 10 if it was Bama Penn State. We're not that, so I'll say it's like a 8.5, 9.
And it's one of those things from our perspective, which is why you're here. We don't care about anybody else's perspective. From a northern perspective, the chance to have Alabama come north, like a wounded, vulnerable Alabama team, and come to State College and get a dose of what we saw on Saturday night and thought was a very good Penn State team, that is very appetizing. SMU might be, I'm sure Penn State's going to be favored by more over SMU than it would have been against Alabama. Like the alternative of Bama comes north and beats Penn State, that kind of would have stunk. So but in terms of if we're getting one SEC team coming north, and then SMU, it's like, there's no vitriol for SMU. They earned their spot, but it would have been fun for Notre Dame, like an SEC team in South Bend would have been fun, but this alternative is pretty cool. And just so people know, this is probably what we're getting for us. You're probably going to go to the Rose Bowl to cover Oregon against Ohio State or Tennessee. And I'm probably going to go to the Sugar Bowl to cover a northern team playing Georgia, either Notre Dame or Indiana, and that'll be pretty cool.
Yeah, that will probably be the plan, because my plan is to kind of follow Ohio State as long as it goes. So, that'll be cool. I think, Ohio State is going to earn it. If Ohio State wins a national title, they definitely have the toughest road here. But yeah, that sounds like it will be the plan. Either Indiana or Notre Dame going to play Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. That'll be right down in New Orleans. That's pretty tasty. When we split up and I'm in Pasadena, although I'll be very excited to go, I can't lie, I'll be a little jealous of you getting to go watch either Sigs or Notre Dame take on the Dogs.
Yeah. These first round games, we will definitely be at Ohio State, Tennessee, and then we'll definitely be at Notre Dame, Indiana, and we'll try to get to Penn State, SMU one way or the other, maybe if we can. I think the reality did play out almost in a worst case scenario, like the most extreme it could be, versus would you rather be the 1, would you rather be the 5, which has been a discussion for a long time. It was interesting how they unveiled the bracket, that they showed what the teams were seeded. Texas as the 5 is getting number 16 seed Clemson Number 16 ranked Clemson, who is the 12 seed, and number 12 ranked Arizona State, who is the 4 seed. So Texas has a path to the semis without playing a top 10 team in the ranking, which is pretty crazy. Whereas Oregon is waiting for the winner of number 6 ranked Ohio State versus number 7 ranked Tennessee. That's what the best team in the country gets. This feels like that, and Reese Davis referred to that. That's going to change. I don't think that lasts more than a year. This is so extreme. They can't let this stand. And I agree with that.
Yeah, no, it'll change. I think we'll have reseeding conversations. We'll have automatic bye conversations, and whether or not a conference champion should trigger that the way it does right now, which I think is all well and good, right? Like, I'm glad we're here. I'm glad we have the 12-team playoff. I'm glad we have like more inclusivity with the postseason in college football, but we knew it wasn't going to be perfect. And now, even as we have the first bracket of the 12-team era, there are clearly some things that we'll have to get ironed out down the road. But I'm not worried about that right now because these games are going to be fun, and that's what matters.
Yeah. More. Do you want to talk about the little regions and what we think of the matchups and how they might unfold? We may or may not like tell you first blush who we think is going to win the national championship today. We're going to preview all the first round games. We're going to dive in deep. We're going to make picks. We have a lot of stuff coming the next 2 weeks on Kings of the North live Monday through Thursday at noon on YouTube. Let's start with this 8-9 game between Ohio State and Tennessee. This is not unexpected. We saw. So the thing that happened in the end is they didn't move anybody.
Yes.
That Texas and Penn State both lost in conference championship games and held their spots. So the thing we talked about Saturday night of that 5, 6, 7, 8, how would it go? It wound up going the exact way they were seeded going into conference championship weekend, which is proof that they didn't penalize anybody for losing. Texas was ahead of Penn State previously. They still are. Penn State was ahead of Notre Dame and Ohio State previously. They still are. That was at least some message. You are punished really 0 for a loss in the conference championship game.
Yeah, provided it's not it's, not the Big 12 championship, right? Where you have 2 teams that don't have compelling at-large cases.
Yeah.
But, I mean, they told us that was going to be the case. I didn't 100% believe it, right? But now that we have this bracket out, they kind of stuck to their word. I am fairly surprised that Penn State stayed ahead of Ohio State.
Okay.
But if that's what they said they were going to do, kind of going in the conference championship weekend, they did telegraph it. So I guess that's okay. But I'm a little surprised, and maybe part of it too, like a Notre Dame kind of sandwiched in between them, perhaps made that complicated as well. Because how far do you want to drop Notre Dame down if you start playing around with Penn State and Ohio State, and how far do you want to drop Penn State if it loses? Like I get that's complicated, but I really did think Ohio State was going to be ahead of Penn State. They're not. It's fine. Ohio State has its path. Penn State has its path, and they'll go play the games, and that's all well and good. But I guess maybe the thing that I'm appreciative of the most is that they kind of told us what they were going to do before championship weekend. Mm-hmm. And they stuck to it. And
again, for instance, next year, Oregon and Penn State play in the regular season, and Ohio State and Oregon don't. So if you think like there's a conspiracy or whatever, somebody had to, it's going to change year to year. And there are going to be years where it feels like your team has a harder schedule. Kirby Smart's complaining about it. That's not how it's always going to be. So what happens here is that in this little 3-team region, it's Big Ten 1, Big Ten 3, and SEC 3 are all against each other, which is a pretty stacked region when you think about this. And I think it's fair to talk about this like you do the NCAA basketball tournament, which is the toughest region. If you looked at this, there's no doubt that this is the toughest region. If you want to go by like rankings where they add up the points of the rankings, the Oregon region, the total rankings is 14. The Arizona State region, the total rankings is 31. This is rankings, not seedings. The Georgia region, the rankings is 15. And the Boise State region, the rankings are 23. So this is the hardest region. Mm-hmm. The Oregon meeting the Ohio State Tennessee winner. We've seen Ohio State and Oregon play a 1-point game on Oregon's field. If we get an Ohio State-Oregon rematch in the Rose Bowl, knowing Ohio State lost to Michigan, knowing how good Oregon has looked, that's going to be a 1-8 game that Oregon's going to be like a 2.5-point favorite. in that game. Like this is you could look at like, oh, the draw for
Are we
Ohio State
sure?
versus
Are we
Penn
sure
State.
Oregon's favorite? Are we
Well,
sure?
can you imagine that?
Yeah.
You're the undisputed number 1 seed, only undefeated team. You are the betting favorite to win the national title, and we're not sure that you're going to be a favorite in your first game. Like this is one of those where right away where you're staring at the bracket and being like, why is it this way?
Yeah, it's really weird. I mean, it is kind of puzzling now that we're like this bracket or this region is ridiculous. You laid out what Texas has to do. Penn State's path is like incredibly welcoming for the team that lost its Big Ten title game. Penn State like gets to play 2 G5 teams. Like SMU has been a power conference team for 6 months. Like, and now that if they win that game, they get to go play Boise State. And like, they're good teams, right? I think either one of those teams could beat Penn State. But man, to lose your conference championship and fall down the rankings and land into a spot where your path to a semifinal is to beat 2 Group of 5 teams is something else.
Yeah. 3 of the best 7 teams in the country are in this same region here.
Yeah.
This Ohio State Tennessee game, Kirk Herbstreit made a point, and I certainly have not. I've certainly expressed this kind of view before, that I feel like Ohio Stadium, when Ohio State gets behind and there are expectations for the Buckeyes, can get on edge. We certainly have seen them be booed at times. There are, again, like Iowa got booed in the game it beat Nebraska in the last game of the regular season. Like fans get itchy if you're not scoring points. And so fans can do whatever they want to do. He thought it would actually be better for Ohio State to play on the road in round 1. That I disagree with. That I think this is not so venomous that you don't want to be there. And 100,000 seat stadium. This is a matchup of 2 of the 4 largest stadiums in the country. You'd rather be in your own.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, I jokingly said, like, does Ohio State want to go on the road? Like, I don't actually believe they should want to go on the road for this game. If you're giving me the choice between playing in the shoe against Tennessee or playing in Neyland against Tennessee, like, I'm taking the shoe, of course. And I don't know, like, we'll see what Ohio Stadium is like. I think that place will be pretty turned up for Tennessee coming north, and they'll want Ohio State to win those games. So win that game. So I think it'll be fine. And like, if Ohio State, I guess I would say, like, if the crowd ends up not being behind Ohio State, well, it's like Ohio State was going to lose that game anyway, because it means they're playing poorly. So like, it's not. I think you're making too much of it. I think if you truly believe Ohio State should go on the road,
I don't think Ohio State would play poorly because their crowd booed them, right? Or they would lose because their crowd booed them. Their crowd might boo them if they're losing and playing poorly. Right. But that's the marquee matchup of the first round, right? When you have this is what we envisioned. And again, just like with the Notre Dame Indiana matchup and the Texas Clemson matchup, like you're just missing a couple Big Ten SEC opportunities there, right? If it somehow would have been Clemson, Notre Dame, and Texas, Indiana, like you're creating some greater things there, even though Clemson and Notre Dame are basically in the same conference. But this is like our only Big Ten SEC matchup. And when we talk North and South, I mean, a big chunk of that is Big Ten SEC. This is what the playoff is about. Like, to us, this encapsulates what we are doing here, but also what we believe college football to be in the modern world, which is a north-south split. And the only place that's fully captured in this playoff is Ohio State, Tennessee. So this is where a lot of eyeballs are going to be.
Yeah. If you ask anyone involved with the construction of the 12-team playoff, your wildest fantasies, best case scenario, it is Ohio State playing probably either like Alabama or Georgia on campus, play in Columbus, play it down south, wherever it is. This isn't quite that, but it's the best thing we have for this year. So this is it. This is the game that is talked about the most in the build up to the playoff, as it should be. And I'm glad we landed here. You and I were driving back from the Big Ten title game this morning, like, I think a little worried that we might get Indiana, Ohio State, which like could very well be a good game, but we've seen it already. We saw how it ended up. I didn't want the committee to craft a bracket that was sort of to like get Indiana out of the picture as quickly as possible by making them play Ohio State when they didn't have to. So I'm pretty pleased with this, and I'm definitely fired up for Ohio State, Tennessee, which they're showing now on the screen is going to be Saturday night.
So let's run through the official game times for these games. Notre Dame, Indiana is the Friday night game. Notre Dame, Indiana, 8 Eastern in South Bend is the Friday night game. The early noon game on Saturday is Penn State, SMU. So we are not getting whiteout night game conditions in Happy Valley. It might be a whiteout, but again, like I just thought that Penn State at night would encapsulate maybe. But once that is SMU, if that was Alabama, maybe it would have been that from a TV perspective. Mm-hmm. Then the mid-afternoon game on Saturday is Texas Clemson at 4 Eastern. And then the night game, you knew Ohio State was going to be a night game. It is Saturday night. So do we anticipate Bill Landis attempting to pull off the Notre Dame Ohio State double dip on Friday night, Saturday night?
That's going to be my plan. I hope the weather accommodates. I booked a hotel. I booked a hotel for a Notre Dame playoff game like 3 weeks ago. So I have it there already. And yeah, I'm going to try to go there Friday and OSU on Saturday. What are you think you might try to go the Notre Dame Penn State double dip? Because that's tough. Noon kick. That's tough.
That's a noon kick. I think I might just be Penn State then. That if you've got Notre Dame covered, because we need to be at that Northern banger. But if you've got that covered, then I think I'll go to Penn State at noon on Saturday. Okay. And then we can ignore Texas Clemson. And then just as a point of information, that Texas Clemson winner would be in the Peach Bowl against Arizona State. Penn State SMU winner against Boise State in the Fiesta Bowl. Notre Dame, Indiana, and the Sugar against Georgia, the Rose Bowl, Oregon versus the Ohio State, Tennessee winner. So this is tough for Oregon, though, right?
Is Ohio State's potential path beat Tennessee at home, play Oregon in the Rose Bowl, play Texas in the Cotton Bowl, and play Georgia in Atlanta?
Oh, wow. Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So again, like the ultimate, so we don't really have, so that this finishes top region, the Oregon region. This is a tough draw for Oregon too. That like, if you think that, I mean, not two, but the idea that Oregon, you're the best team, and coming into the season, we thought, okay, most people thought the shorthand was there's 4 teams at the top of the sport: Oregon, Ohio State, Georgia, and Texas. Now, because of Ohio State's loss to Michigan, you would potentially get, if Ohio State wins, it's not potentially, if they win, an Oregon-Ohio State rematch when that was a toss-up game in the moment, Bill. It was a toss-up game in the moment, and that is a tough spot for Oregon in round 1. And I do think some of the stuff that, one of the things that I'm going to be very curious about, Bill, how this plays out, is there's going to be 3 teams that end up playing one more game than anybody else that don't have like a bye in here, because everybody's going to have off for this amount of time until the first round, right?
Right.
But Texas, Penn State, and SMU played this weekend and also have to play the first weekend. Mm-hmm. Everybody else who's playing the first weekend was home or played this weekend one and then has the extra time off. So I'm curious to see if it feels like now Penn State, SMU, they're in the same boat. I'm curious to see what that feels like for Clemson, if they're like maybe run down. Oh no, Texas has to do that too. Anyway, there's 4 teams who have to do that in the first round: Texas, Clemson, Penn State, SMU. Yeah, and they're all playing each other, so there's no edge there. Interesting. Okay, because like Ohio State and Tennessee are both going to be rested. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Like this feels like the kind of thing, and we're just repeating ourselves. This kind of isn't fair for Oregon. Is who it's not fair for. And so like they're going to fix this before next year.
But it's not, it's only if that, like, put that bracket back up again. If chalk prevails with the exception of the 8-9 game, and you say, hey, Oregon, here are your potential quarterfinal opponents: Texas, Tennessee, Penn State, or Notre Dame, they would pick Tennessee. Right?
Well, that's not chalk, but yeah. I mean, Ohio State.
No, I said if chalk prevailed in any of the other 3 matches except for the 8-9 game.
No, I guess that's true. Yeah, you don't want to play Notre Dame the way Notre Dame's playing, and Penn State looked great. No, I guess that's true. This is really about Ohio State. This is one of those things like Ohio State losing to Michigan, like, messed up the bracket because Ohio State is viewed as a more talented team and a quote better team than an 8 seed, but they lost. It's their own fault. So then it's just one of those, like, this is how it goes. Okay. So again, that is just clearly by the rankings, the most difficult bracket. The next bracket we can spend not as much time on. The next region is the Arizona State region. This is Arizona State as the 4 seed, ranked 12th, getting the winner of Texas Clemson, which is the 3rd ranked team versus the 16th ranked team. I can stare at this, Landis, and put Arizona State in the semifinals.
You got scatterbooed over the weekend.
I did. But Cam Scatterboo is going to be the most dangerous guy with the ball in his hands in a Texas Arizona State game, isn't he?
He is the most dangerous man in that region. No.
Yeah.
That's fun too.
So
we should do that. Who's the most dangerous man in each region?
Yeah, but like you're not looking at that. Like you look at that and think that's a Texas path, or you think like Arizona State?
I mean, I don't know. Quinn Ewers looks pretty bad right now. So I mean, Texas's defense is pretty good. Texas is good up front. Like, if anyone's going to stop Cam Scatterboo, it's a team with size and speed on its defensive line, and Texas has that, or in its defensive front, and Texas has that. So yeah, that even though I'm pretty impressed with Arizona State, and I definitely love what I saw out of Cam Scatterboo, and I think Arizona State could beat either one of those teams, I still look at it as a pretty favorable path there for Texas.
Craig Hoffman, too much orange in this bracket for me. There is
love orange,
a lot of. I do love orange. So we just are not going to spend as much time on that region. You can go listen to JD Pickle or somebody else talk about Texas and Clemson. It's just not our jam. Georgia as the 2 seed opposite Notre Dame, Indiana. Notre Dame's going to be, I mean, I'm sure the lines are out. I don't know if producer Mike could find the lines or if he sees lines or anything, or if you, I guess I could find them too, Landis, if I'm like the competent individual. But Notre Dame, Indiana.
I've got Notre Dame, Indiana on DraftKings is Notre Dame 8.5.
8.5. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Don't you think? So this is one of those where it feels like, is Notre Dame physical enough to hang with Georgia, but maybe Notre Dame is not so explosive that Indiana can't hang with Notre Dame? Like, I think like the two ends of the Notre Dame equation, I think would lead to, I think Indiana, Notre Dame could be competitive, but I also think Notre Dame, Georgia could be competitive, but I'm not sure Indiana, Georgia would be competitive.
Oh, yeah. I think that's right. Because the thing you worry about with Indiana is just getting overwhelmed by another really good defensive front. And Notre Dame definitely has one, but Notre Dame is also dealing with injuries on its defense, including 2 at the edge rusher position. So Notre Dame's defense is awesome. I like it. It could be the best defense in the country. We'll find out, I guess, as it goes through this process here, because it's played really well. But like, if you're Indiana, I don't think you wanted to see like Ohio State again. You know how that goes, like Tennessee or Georgia or whatever. Like those are defensive fronts that I think would give you real problems. So maybe Indiana would have preferred a Penn State, perhaps. I'm not sure. But playing in South Bend, like, they're going to get a decent amount of Hoosier love there too. So I think it's a pretty good spot for Indiana to take its swing.
Yeah, I agree. But we thought, like, driving over in the car, like just this weekend, we kind of thought, you know what? Like, we think Notre Dame could have a chance to do something here. Mm-hmm. And the idea that Notre Dame has a very high, I think, baseline level of success since the Northern Illinois loss. They've overcome injuries. You kind of know who they are. They have multiple running backs. Their quarterback can run the ball. Their secondary has played well, even though Ben Morrison is out, right? They've overcome some linebacker injuries. Like, I think Notre Dame is like super solid. And so if Georgia is either dealing with Carson Beck, who has been a kind of a turnover machine and unreliable all year, or a backup quarterback, I actually think, like, I don't think Notre Dame would be afraid of Georgia, right? I don't know that it would go well for Indiana against Georgia, though, given what we've seen.
I wouldn't love that, but I think Notre Dame is up for that challenge, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. So, and then the last one, let's look at the SMU Penn State line. Is Penn State -8. So Penn State -8 at home against SMU at noon. I mean, is there anything that SMU does that Penn State can't handle? And I think we got a really good version of Penn State on Saturday night.
Yeah, I mean, Kevin Jennings is pretty dynamic. When he starts using his legs, he's among, I think, the more dangerous, explosive quarterbacks in the country. So Penn State will have to contend with that. Like, I don't know how many. I know they just played Dylan Gabriel, but like, how many super athletic, dynamic quarterbacks has Penn State faced this year? So that could be a little bit of a different flavor of team for Penn State to try to prepare for. But yeah, I mean, otherwise it's you like the matchup for Penn State. I think overall you like the fact that it has to go play Boise. You like the fact that if you're Penn State, you lost to Ohio State and Oregon and ended up with an easier path to the semifinal than both of them. So that's good for Penn State, I guess.
So just to recap here, the betting lines: Penn State favored by 8 over SMU, Notre Dame favored by 8.5 over Indiana. I have the Clemson Texas line. Did you see it, or do you want to guess it?
Yeah, I saw it. Yeah, it's the biggest one of the weekend. Yeah.
Texas minus 10.5 against Clemson, and Ohio State minus 7 against Tennessee. So we just had a weekend where every single conference championship game, now again, they were at neutral sites, you would expect this to some degree, was a touchdown or less. And now every single first round game is a touchdown or more. But some degree of that is home field.
Yes.
Right? On a neutral site, degree, Ohio State, Tennessee is not a 7-point game on a neutral field, right?
No. It's more like 3.5, 4, perhaps.
Yeah.
And I think Clemson, Texas is probably more like a touchdown. Yeah. So I mean, it makes sense, right? Home field being baked into it, I think makes sense.
So I don't want to it's only a 26-minute show so far. Let me ask this, because I'm trying to imagine what all the other shows are doing.
They're yelling about whether or not Alabama or SMU should have been in.
I don't think people were talking about this as like a litmus test for the future of college football. Like that it was a struggle for the future of the sport. And I don't think either case is so drop dead super compelling of you shouldn't be knocked out because you lost your conference championship games versus you have 3 losses, but you played a more difficult schedule. It's all on the margins to me. And so there's only so much yelling that I can muster for a discussion on the margins. But I guess the honkers are honking. Are the honkers honking? Is anybody in the chat finding some honkers?
I didn't have Twitter open because I saw Brett McMurphy spoil the SMU Alabama decision right before the show came on, and I didn't want to be spoiled anymore.
Yeah.
Ohio State's official football Twitter account tweeted the meme of the guy like breaking the shackles on his wrist, and it says noon kickoffs.
Oh, for real?
So they are unburdened. They are unburdened by noon kickoffs.
Ryan is asking what honkers are. Honkers are people in the national media or in Southern media who just regurgitate SEC and Southern football talking points and support them regardless. And so I call them honkers because like they're honking like a goose. Like it's like honk, 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 the SEC, honk, honk. And it's like, is that like a thing? Is that a show? Is that an interesting discussion? Like JD Pickleman is a honker. So he's probably honking his honk off right now, talking about how Alabama got boned. But like, that's not what we're doing here, brother.
Yeah,
so,
at least he'll get to see his repeat of the national championship because Georgia and Texas are on opposite sides of the bracket.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Like guys, when you watch that mid SEC championship game and think that you saw a national title. So here's the thing that I think is like really possible. So Oregon or Ohio State as one semifinal participant, it's one of those things. If Ohio State can't beat Tennessee, then they're not the Ohio State that anybody thought they were, and they need a long, hard look at themselves. Is that not fair? Yeah. Like this is exactly at home against a team with a young quarterback and a good defense. And Dylan Sampson is good. They're going to have to stop the run, but there's nothing to fear here that is insurmountable for Ohio State. So then you play Ohio State, Oregon, and take your shot. But like, come on,
I don't know. Like,
come on,
It's pretty good defensive line. And Ohio State's defensive line looked quite bad the last time we saw it. Offensive line.
Or Ohio State's. Yeah,
Ohio State's. Line. Well, I mean both, but offensive line. Yeah, Tennessee's defensive line against Ohio State's offensive line would keep me up at night if I were on the Ohio State side of that.
Okay, so just game plan around it. But I mean, it's just if you can't bring a whole team of NFL guys back and add Will Howard and Caleb Downs and Quinshon Judkins.
I'm not making excuses.
And then be like, oh, well, we couldn't.
No.
I mean, what are we supposed to do? Beat Tennessee? It's like, you're supposed to beat Tennessee. What are you talking about? Yeah. So you get and then Ohio State, Oregon, I don't know. Like, let's see how Ohio State plays against Tennessee. Oregon looked like the best team in the country on Saturday night. So like that's a quarter is a little nuts, but it is what it is. So one of those in a semi, and then they would be opposite Arizona State, Texas, Clemson. Good luck to all involved. It doesn't really have anything to do with us. I don't think right now sitting here, Indiana beating Georgia is hard for me to wrap my mind around. I think Notre Dame can beat Georgia.
I think so.
I don't think that's impossible at all. And then Penn State is the favorite in its region versus Boise State and SMU. And of course, I'm going to get a banner. I got to get a Boise State banner. But Penn State, so the idea that we could have semifinals that are Notre Dame versus Penn State and Ohio State or Oregon versus Texas, like that'd be a pretty good outcome for the North, right?
That'd be pretty great. Yeah. I am wondering as we plan out, like if it ends up being Oregon, Tennessee, I don't know. I might prefer to go to Penn State, Boise, if that's the game that we get in the quarterfinal.
Oh, you don't want to, but you don't want to take in the majesty of the Rose Bowl. There's a sunset there, I hear.
There is. The Rose Bowl is beautiful. I also like
Oregon's one of our teams.
Fiesta Bowl. That's the Fiesta Bowl, right? Oregon is one of our teams, but so is Penn State, and we're adopting Boise for the postseason.
Yeah, we are. Yeah, so it's gonna be a good bracket, and again in the end, and I think I had fights about this like in the preseason. I think I was trying to go back and find it. I'm pretty sure on a Ralph Russo, when Ralph still worked for the AP podcast, I said that the Big Ten would get more teams in the playoffs than the SEC like 12 months ago or something. But
that was one of my outrageous predictions, I think.
So you had been like, you were at like, I'm not sure the SEC is going to get 2, but you were very much early on questioning the depth of the SEC playoff pool, and that here we are, and it wound up 4 Big Ten, 3 SEC, 2 ACC, 1 Big 12, Notre Dame, and a group of 5. We had theorized a lot in the preseason about whether Notre Dame is a de facto Big Ten team because they are in the North. And though they have the agreement with the ACC, I think your mind can think of them more like a Big Ten team, and whether Notre Dame would maybe like take a Big Ten spot. And instead, like the stuff played out on the field, all the consternation all year about like, is Indiana with a 11-1 Indiana going to get screwed? They didn't, because there was no one to screw them. I'm sure people might have wanted to. The Honkers wanted to. The Honkers were still trying to do it when like the discussion is over, Honkers. I don't even know what you're talking about. And so here we are, 6 North, 6 South, 4 Big Ten, 3 SEC. First year of the 12-team playoff. I think the North will take it, brother.
It's a beautiful bracket. And I also love so we were talking in the car also about Siggs went on CBS yesterday, was like running through all the 1-loss teams. And as he was going through it, the one that he seemed to be to kind of put the most pepper on, or the one that seemed he delivered with the most disdain in his voice, was the fact that Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois. So now he gets to go back up his words.
Oh, yeah. So
I'm excited for that.
Shrug Life is asking, what's the difference from week 6 where you guys said Ohio State would have beaten Oregon on a neutral field? Now they can't because they lost to Michigan. And
nothing. Well, offensive line injuries, but
offensive line injuries is part of that. Yeah.
I think Ohio State needs to like weather like the bounce back from Michigan against a good Tennessee defensive line and like get through that. And if it does, like it can absolutely beat Oregon on the neutral field. Doesn't mean, but the path remains incredibly difficult. Like we're supposed to say it's easy for Ohio State. It's incredibly hard. They have, I think, them and Oregon have the most difficult path to try to win a national title, I think. Or Ohio State maybe does, but
I do think it's one of those things, I thought Ohio State's loss to Oregon was like a really good loss. It was a great win for Oregon. It was a good loss for Ohio State. And I didn't know that Ohio State had a clunker offensive performance in itself after that Oregon game, right? So coming immediately off the Oregon game, I was like, man, like Will Howard's kind of the guy. They got a lot of weapons. This offensive, I got to figure out the Josh Simmons injury. We know that. But then the way they played offense against Nebraska, where they only scored 21 points, but it's obviously, especially the way they played offense against Michigan, it's like, okay. At the moment, I thought maybe the floor for Ohio State's offense was higher than it turned out to be. Like at the very least, they're always going to be this dangerous, this competent on offense. And then that was not the case. And then throw in the offensive line injuries, which are part of that anyway. And certainly my view of Ohio State in the second half of the season has changed. My view on Oregon has not. And we talked a lot about, Bill, on Saturday night that, again, it was a reminder, the Big Ten championship game, of how much Oregon missed Tez Johnson. And now that he's back, how efficient and explosive that Oregon offense can be, which is what they showed against Ohio State.
Yeah, but I mean, I think if you want to flip that too, like, don't you feel much better about Ohio State's defense going into this postseason than you would have coming off of the Oregon game? Like, well, Ohio State's offense is working through some stuff, and the offensive line injuries are what they are. But like, I think Ohio State's defense has shown itself to be much better since then too. So like, I'm not necessarily saying like that's enough to like make up for whatever offensive inefficiencies Ohio State might have because of its offensive line, but like that side of the ball changed for the better. If you want to say the offensive side has changed a little bit for the worse, the defense I think has changed for the better.
Yeah. I feel like I'm the only person doing it. I still didn't love the fact that Ohio State's defense and two gotta-have-it drives at the end of the game against Michigan gave up long drives and allowed Michigan to eat up the entire clock. You can't look at a game where Michigan scored 13 points and blame the Ohio State defense. I acknowledge that, but true, great championship defenses, I think, get stops there more effectively than Ohio State did when they allowed Michigan to convert like 5 third downs in the fourth quarter. So, but they can do it. And I think like this is a bracket that does not make a rematch of the Big Ten title game. Again, JD Pickleman fought Georgia, Texas was the national championship game. This is a bracket that could get us to Oregon, Penn State, the national championship game.
Mm-hmm.
Like absolutely could get us to that. Could it not?
It could. Picking Penn State to go to the national title game is kind of tempting, just looking at it. Like if you wanted to throw a future play out there,
yeah,
not a bad path.
Do you want to like make picks? Do people want us to make picks of what we think is? I think we can
make. I think like we can make like first blush picks. If we can also be granted the grace of not being held to them as we dive in a little more into matchups later on in the next 2 weeks.
Okay. Can I do this first? The official DraftKings odds for the national championship now that the bracket is out.
Mm-hmm.
Oregon plus 340, Texas plus 350. And again, they're on the same side of the bracket. Georgia plus 360, Ohio State plus 450. So 3 of the 4 betting favorites are on the same side of the bracket.
Mm-hmm.
Penn State plus 650, Notre Dame 11-1, then a huge drop. Tennessee 28-1, Clemson 40-1, SMU 40-1, Arizona State 50-1, Indiana 50-1, Boise State 60-1. The 3 seed is 60-1, and the longest odds, which again gets back to they probably need to adjust this a little bit. I mean, if I'm going to take a swing, I'm probably taking a swing on Notre Dame at 11-1 because their odds are almost like double Penn State's.
Yeah. And if you believe that Notre Dame can beat Georgia, which I think you do and I do, so that's probably the swing that I would take too.
All right. Do you want to go through the first round?
I also bet on Notre Dame to win the national title like a month ago, so I've already taken.
What were your odds on that? Better than 11-1, I bet. Probably in the 20s, right?
22. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go through the first round games. Do you want to do that real quick? First blush.
Yeah.
We're going to dive in, give you the big game breakdowns the next 2 weeks like we always do. We'll make our picks like we always do. But everybody else is doing this today. We may as well do it. Ohio State, Tennessee. I would take Ohio State.
I would take Ohio State. Yeah.
Like I'm not betting my house on Ohio State, and we understand the matchup difficulties there with the Tennessee defense. But we talked about this Saturday night with the way that Penn State and Oregon played offense on Saturday night should be a reminder for Ohio State of what it should do with its skilled talent to get it out in space. Mm-hmm. Texas, Clemson, I would take Texas.
I'd take Texas in that game as well.
I know I've seen people. Do you think there's any chance that Texas is like, the heck with it? We've got 2 weeks. Let's make Arch the starting quarterback.
Let's play Arch. I don't think it'd be unreasonable.
Yeah.
I guess that's the way I would say it based off how Quinn played.
Interesting conversations for Sark. Yeah. Notre Dame, Indiana, I would take Notre Dame, but it's a matchup that I am not giving up on Indiana's chances of winning that game.
Yeah, same for me. I'll take Notre Dame, but I think it could be surprisingly competitive.
And then I just don't think it's helpful or what the sport should be about, like to create situations of like, oh my God, like this team that made the playoff and have a great year, if they don't win, like they're dead or whatever. But Penn State has to beat SMU at home, right? Like this is non-negotiable.
Yes. Penn State. Yeah. Yes.
I mean, we can't create a scenario where Penn State just played a really competitive game against Oregon and we're like, if James Franklin doesn't win a first round game, he should be fired. But this is sitting there for you. Mm-hmm. They have to at least win the first round game. So we're just taking 4 favorites at first blush, all of whom are favored by at least a touchdown.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, probably the only one I see myself potentially changing my mind on is Ohio State, Tennessee. Like I'll take Ohio State now because it's the home team we're playing around, but I am far from locked in on that.
Okay. So now do you want to make what's your national championship game? First blush national championship game.
Oregon, Penn State.
I think that might be mine too. I think I'm very close on Penn State or Notre Dame. I absolutely think Georgia is beatable, which, I mean, come on. Mm-hmm. Guys, watch this show. Like, that is not a surprising statement that I think Georgia is beatable. I'll be very curious to see where the Carson Beck stuff goes.
That's part of it for me too. Yeah. What's his status?
But like, if I'm trying to think of a Penn State Notre Dame semifinal, now I am thinking just a little bit about some of the plays Drew Aller made and Nick Singleton's explosiveness. And I do think Penn State is a scooch more dangerous offensively, while Notre Dame is super, I think, do your job.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
I could go Oregon, Notre Dame too, but
yeah,
I think anything but Texas, Georgia. I just don't want to watch Texas, Georgia.
Oh my God, no! Because we've talked about the idea, and that was one of, I think, my predictions of the preseason was like 3 Ohio State Oregon games, and if Ohio State beat Michigan, we would have maybe had a shot at that, but we at least have a shot at a second one here. But I don't want, and that's one of those. I don't want to. Someone did a bracket. Someone at Saturday Down South did like a bracket of what if the SEC broke off and did its own playoff, and it's like here would be the matchups in an 8-team SEC playoff. And he was like, I would watch that, and I was like, I would not.
What if I farted into my hand and cupped it and brought it up to my nose? Would that be enjoyable too? And I don't think so. No thanks.
I'm like, oh man, I'd love to see this first round game between South Carolina and Texas A&M. We're just like, what are we talking about? They're so diluted. Because again, like, we stand up for the North. We aren't tweeting things like, oh man, let's just break off and do our own thing. If we had an all North playoff with no SEC, this is what it would look like. Who would watch? We just accept the sport for what it is, you frickin' maniacs, troll, honk, or moron. Okay. I don't have a ton more to say right now because I'm not outraged.
No, I'm not outraged. I'm excited. And I got to run over to Ohio State here in a few minutes for Ryan Day's press conference. But I think we ended up in a pretty good spot. There was a pathway that we would have been excited either way, but I think really could have taken the wind out of our sails a little bit, like if we didn't get an SEC team coming north or something like that. So we got that. We got Indiana, Notre Dame. Penn State's got a really compelling path. Like, I think we did all right.
And can I just remind any of the final, I don't know if there are any out there, 4-team truthers, based on the rankings, if this was a 4-team playoff, do you know what the 2 semifinals would be? Rematches of the conference championship games. It would be 1 Oregon versus 4 Penn State and 2 Georgia versus 3 Texas, based on their rankings. So, like, if you don't like this, tell me what you would like better. Is that for real? Because people,
I guess they would fudge it though, right?
I don't know if they would have, but I mean, like that. I don't know.
Or
I don't know.
Texas, Georgia, Penn State. I think they would. Yeah.
So, but again, so that's and that is so what that is, and we talked about this with Dan Wetzel a couple weeks ago. Going into the season, it was 4 teams everybody was looking at. These would be 3 of the 4 teams that everybody looked at the whole year, and Penn State and Ohio State spot because Ohio State lost to Michigan. But otherwise, everything else that happened, all the Boise stuff, all the Big 12 stuff, all the SMU Alabama debate, all Clemson getting in, all Notre Dame responding, to the Northern Illinois loss, Indiana's whole year, all of that would just be to get into New Year's Six bowls so that guys can opt out. Like it wouldn't have mattered. I almost can't believe we ever did that before. Because looking back now makes my stomach hurt. This is so much better. Isn't this so much better? Do we all agree here? So,
but you would have been pretty fired up though if they would have fudged it and then gave us 2 North versus South semifinals. Like,
I guess, but
I'm also not convinced that Penn State would be in if it were a 14 playoff.
But you also just would have we just would have made everybody else irrelevant.
Mm-hmm. Oh right?
Yeah. 12's irrelevant. The ACC's irrelevant.
Yeah.
Notre Dame's irrelevant because we're just taking the 2 best teams in the 2 biggest conferences. And like, how's everybody like that? So I think this actually turned out pretty good.
Yeah.
So, and just don't lose 3 games. And so now get ready. We have to prepare ourselves, and it does affect us. So we have to pay some attention to it, to a rash of stories about what the SEC is going to do to change the structure because they're so mad. But the bottom line is we're already going to get to a 14-team playoff. They've already decided that. And I'm sure we're going to do away with the buys for all the conference champs. So like we're already headed toward that. And like, what else are they going to do? And actually, if we get to a point where there's a guaranteed number of spots for certain conferences, fine. Like, I'm fine with that. So, like, let's not, the thing I would say is don't let the SEC's tears and angers. I personally will be fueled for the next 2 weeks on the tears of the SEC. Yeah. So be fueled by then, but don't let them make you nervous that like the SEC is going to blow up the sport, because whatever changes are going to be made to like guarantee a little more SEC access, we're probably coming anyway. So it's fine. And if they really want to go do their own thing because they're so mad, then they can cram it. And then we'll own this. We'll own this. And if I need to make a tweet that says, oh, Northern playoff, I'd take this, I guess we can do that Saturday down south. But in the meantime, let's see who's going to win. All right, Landis, any parting thoughts?
I was going to say the South can cram it, but you already said that. Yeah. No, I might bathe in the SEC tears. I might drink some of the SEC tears. I'm not going to let it ruin my enjoyment of the college football postseason.
Yeah. No, I think that's good. I think that's right. So we have other stuff to talk about. Looks like Barry Odom, the UNLV coach, the former Missouri coach, is going to be hired at Purdue. The Kansas offensive coordinator, Jeff Grimes, left to go to Wisconsin. Kansas promoted their other co-OC to the full-time gig within the program. Like, there's other stuff like that to talk about. Bunch of teams going to play in cool bowl games, but this was a playoff show. We'll keep this a playoff show. Monday, we'll get to all kinds of other stuff. More playoff thoughts, coaching changes, portal stuff. Isaac Wilson, the Utah freshman quarterback, is in the portal. All those, and then the bowl stuff for all these other teams that really do matter to these teams. We're of course going to talk about that, but for now, 6 Northern teams in the playoff, an absolute pretty good chance of a Northern national champ. Nothing is taken for granted, but the North has a shot, and that's just what we like to remind the South of. Landis, doesn't mean that we're better. It means we're just as good.
It just means we're here.
And we're here. We're here.
Yeah,
we're here, and we're clearly here. We're planting a flag. That I would do. I don't know what I think about flag planting, but if sometime in the next 2 weeks I get a King to the North flag made and I go plant it in Knoxville, Tennessee, that might happen.
Yeah.
But plant it in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, or Athens, Georgia, that could happen. Probably not going to go plant it at SMU. If I went and planted on SMU's campus and they were like, why are you doing this?
You got to be careful.
Why are you doing
Texas,
this,
man?
Careful. Actually, that's not even joking around. All right. Thanks to you guys for being here. We'll see you on Monday. Many great things ahead. We're going to be at as many of these games in every round as possible. Where the North goes, we will go, and we will talk about all of it. For now, thanks to our producer, Mike Urostowski. Thanks to you guys for being here. He's Bill Landis. I'm Doug Lesmeriss, and that was Kings of the North.